Of course, the one piece of oh, here we go. Everything is organized onto what I need tonight and what I need and all the old stuff. So, okay, so we have minutes from February 23rd, and and then we also have. So what we'll do is, why don't we approve the minutes from the 23rd, and then we'll talk over the new minute format after that. Does that make sense? Or should we do it the other way?
No.
Okay. Okay. So let's review those minutes for the 23rd. Follow the new format.
I was just going to say page numbers and where does on the video.
Is this more difficult?
Nice.
It took longer time for you to put in the video time, starts, and everything.
Okay.
That's not what
Thank you.
it took more. Okay. I know, but that plays into our next discussion.
Very nice.
I mean, it's almost exact as exact as I could be. It might be a few seconds off, but.
No, I think to the, yeah, I think even the time is fine.
Because that'll give people the idea where to look at
It's
the
just,
video they want.
yeah, it's just,
Point in the right
Yeah.
direction.
That'd be easy to do.
oriented and let's go public site for people. Solution.
Okay, do we have any motions relative to the minutes?
I motion to approve.
We have a second?
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, aye, unanimous. Okay, great. And then the next piece is Jennifer's email that basically lays out the minutes in the pretty much in the format that Angela did last meeting's minutes. So, you know, one sentence summary for each major topic with the start time listed. The motions are written in, and then we'll make sure to note any requests for information. Link to the document.
So for example, if we're referencing the SIP or the budget, the link would go in.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And on the video, there cannot be a link to the video, correct? I've never tried that.
But I
Okay.
gave you directions.
No, it's
on how to
great,
get to
and you
the-
can copy, paste it every time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
easier.
right.
The video doesn't have to be maintained as the public record, only the minutes do.
Right.
So eventually the minute reference, although we keep, we can believe they keep the videos for
Right.
quite a period of time, it's not a requirement. So
Mhm.
the references to point on the tape will eventually become, over a long period of time, less relevant because they won't be able to find the tape.
Right.
We do a lot on demand here, though. We do a really extraordinary job. In most communities, you wouldn't be able to do it on demand now. You wouldn't be able to look back so far. And the way the cutoff is here, but the readily on demand stuff does not come back.
Does it go back, what, at least 2 years or something?
Probably, I think it goes back that far, but it's not required. It just happens to be, we've got a fairly robust system. We've got a well-run cable access group, but
Right.
typically if we were requesting a tape and it's beyond a certain period, I wish I could tell you how long.
No, that's okay.
They have to go find it on a server somewhere. It's not a requirement, it happens
Right.
to be how we function, but not a requirement.
Well, that's pretty relevant information.
It is, and I'm just wondering, like, for example,
Can it be archived?
yes. Can it be thrown up into YouTube as unlisted and just an archive that way to use a free service? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know
but
what's
then,
allowed.
you know, you can't really outsource our, I mean, I know you could upload it to YouTube and it'll probably stay there forever, but that's not really, I mean, it's,
We actually have an NA Cam North YouTube YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That's where most of the stuff actually is placed.
Okay.
It's placed on our service, but connected to a YouTube channel.
But this new Google thing that we have.
That's for documents.
Yeah.
We're talking about video, the documents have to be retained, but the
Yeah.
video that goes to YouTube.
How about the,
I guess I'm
The Google
separating it as a discussion point is, and I mean this in all due respect, the Finance Committee doesn't direct NACAM.
Right.
We were fortunate that NACAM's processes
Yeah.
retain information that you're referring to, but they're not required to do that. And
Right.
in some communities, most communities, it wouldn't exist, and either you or I direct NACAM as to what they're doing. It just happens to be they do it and they do it well.
Right.
So, I'm just raising the fact that the minutes are sort of standalone from the video
Right.
as it relates to public open meeting law stuff, but it's a really great reference. And if it's ever worth it, we can explore it separately. There are companies that actually link this directly to the video. So on the left panel, you would actually see the agenda. You'd click on the agenda and it would fast forward to that section.
Mhm.
I've talked to Brian about that in the past, but it really would require a third party relationship.
Right.
what I'm asking is, with this new IT platform that we have, Google, there must be other parts of the whole Google thing where you can shoot something up into their cloud, or?
You could save
Nope.
the video into it, but I think what Andrew's saying is it's not a requirement, nor can
Right.
we ask for it to be required.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because it's North
but
Andover
could we do it?
cable access, but then we'd have to, we don't have, as a town, that's not the business we want to be into. The NACAM is perfect at what they do. They've got, they're funding through the whole sort of FCC, situation, and it's a great sort of benefit. But as a municipal function, it would be, a huge undertaking for North Andover to kind of take it to that level of sort of video storage and video maintenance and so forth.
Well,
it would
then-
probably be recurring costs and things like
Well, then I
that.
think we have to reinvestigate the process by which we throw magic sand to shrink the minutes.
Well, I think the minutes that are the way they're done right here, I think we can't. I think the part that I took from Andrew's comment and reading these minutes, hopefully, having sat through it, obviously I bring a greater background knowledge to it than somebody else. But I think if you read these minutes and you weren't at the meeting, you would understand what went on at the meeting. You would understand the substance of what was discussed and so forth. We can't outsource kind of the content of our minutes and, as a public record, under, our responsibilities to hold public records. We can't outsource that to the video. We can make it user-friendly with the video, so if people really want to understand what's going on at FinCom, they can, toggle back and forth between the two. I think that is fine. I think, like this level of detail in the minutes, could it be half a page shorter? Maybe. It could be half a page shorter, but
When I
I
read
think
these
that it.
minutes, I think, there's only one person in the FinCom who came, and that's you. Sorry. Okay?
Yeah.
The rest of us are just like
No, but
excess
people
bag.
made motions. It's like
Yeah.
they're in there.
Right, but you don't know what the
gee.
emotions are.
Right.
Go to a one
And listen, most of
sentence-
most of what I said was welcome or thank you.
You prepare for these meetings, you develop your questions, you
Yeah.
read the book, you ask the questions, and they go into the ether.
But again, the point of the minutes, I would think, is to summarize the main points. And so I don't think it's as important that we have, that's why we didn't want to have each person's comment,
Yeah.
because it gets so long.
Yeah, right.
But we would want to change it to have a summary of the main points
Yeah.
of each topic.
But that requires Angela to interpret and
Yeah.
make a decision on summary, and I brought this up last time, versus just taking word for word and,
But I think we have to have some trust.
Right.
I don't mind the trust, I mind the responsibility and time.
Right,
Just
but
a
I
point.
think that's just how minutes
Just to
are.
point out, we have two opportunities here. One, as we're going through today, and we say, hey, this is an important thing, Angela, and making a motion that that's be included in the minutes, and someone seconds it. That's one way. The other way, by the way, is that I think this is the right level of information, and if you or any of us disagree, say, hey, look, we talked about something hot and heavy last week. That's the reason why we review the minutes. And therefore, we can then insert saying, oh, you're absolutely right. There was a miss. And
Or
we'll
she could
fill
go
it.
back to the recording and then write it for the next time for a revision.
That's all I'm saying is that I think we have our bases covered in all of this.
Well, I would go a step further and say that, and if you look at this, there's more information contained in these minutes than any minutes that, since, I don't know, I've been on the board, right? Because this points you to all the resources. So just that alone, I think, has more value. And maybe you just put a disclaimer in at the end and say, the video record of this, has a short shelf life, however you want to convey that, but just let them know that the video record is not the permanent record. This is the permanent record. Now that's in there, and you've got the reference points. I'm agree with you too, Tim, which is if there's a disagreement, there's an that's why you then review it. Yeah.
Yep.
Or during the meeting, we can say, Angela, this is a really important point, make sure it's in the minutes.
Yeah.
So, that makes sense.
All right. I think it's good.
Great. One stratagem or the other, it'll work.
Okay.
Great.
Did you get that down, Angela?
She listens to the recording.
Okay.
I'm sure it will help you.
All right, so next we have our town manager, Amber Mailer, coming to talk about his portion of the budget, facilities, IT, admin, his office. If that's the right term to use for it.
Whatever term you like.
Okay.
So, I haven't looked at the minutes in this format before, just whatever it's worth. I think Angela did a great job. Typically, what's required now under the open meeting law is actually hard copies of any document you refer to. So any
Right.
document you receive at a meeting, and the budget's a little awkward, right, because that's an ongoing thing. So technically, at one meeting, you need to include the budget, but you wouldn't include the budget in every meeting. So it's, yeah, but in the actual minutes that get filed, the physical document
Oh,
needs to be attached to the package,
Oh.
yeah. But in a case like a budget, it's once, you do it once, but yeah, it's great. I think it's
So in other
good work.
words, and so when you say the file that, I'm sorry, you say the file of the official things, is that like a
It's the minutes.
Is that like a Rolodex minute file of here's each minute, each
Yeah.
meeting, and we have a little file folder for each meeting, and that's the official record?
Correct.
Or
Correct.
all the documents have to be PDF and put up on the website?
There isn't a requirement, you gotta say, sometimes different to distinguish the requirements versus the expectations for
Right,
transparency.
right.
There is no requirement for posting anything on a website. There is no requirement for a municipality to have a website. So the standards you see across all municipalities vary greatly. We publish actually an extraordinary amount of information on our websites, more than most communities. Employment contracts, audits going back 20 years, budgets. So depending upon if you did search on municipalities throughout the nation, you'd see this sort of, it's all over the place, quite frankly. So from the point of view of what's available on the website, it's not as logical sometimes to include, if the minutes packages include a lot of attachments, if that's a regular course of business for a committee, it isn't as much here. But if it were in a particular committee, in every meeting, they got a lot of attachments. The idea of scanning all those and making them available on a website may not make sense, depending on how sophisticated the community is. But ultimately, in that folder, that hard folder, items that are presented at the meeting need to be included with the minutes. Everything else is superfluous, quite frankly. The reference to videos, any note that a video exists, it's all don't confuse superfluous with relevant or important, all not necessary, but it doesn't mean it doesn't add a value.
I do have them at my desk.
Yeah, I
like
figured.
by each meeting,
Sure.
I have a package, of each meeting. That's what you did?
Yeah, I assume so. I was more for the board's benefit, but
Right,
yeah,
right.
I assume that was the case. Yeah, it's great. So shared services, I guess, is that what we call them? We call them a few different things, operations of shared services. I think we talked a little bit about that. There was certainly a level of overlap as it relates to the capital plan to a certain extent, I really can just open it to questions beyond the individual budgetary items. On the IT side, a couple of the major changes is that there was one outlier position within the school department which is functioned in an IT capacity. We included that now, took it out of the school budget. So in addition to the 3.7% for the schools, in essence, the shared services assumed a salary of a position that had previously been funded through the school budget. We added that to the IT budget so that it now is truly a whole representation of a department that sits between school and town. That was a significant change in this particular budget line item this year. Some additional dollars on the capital side as we need to expand some of our storage capability within our servers here. One of the things that were identified by Chris, you all met Chris. Chris is great, dynamic, exciting, has brought a lot of new initiatives here to the town, which is great. One of the things that he recognizes is that we have tremendous capacity or bandwidth, but we lack in some of the areas of storage that he would like to see. So in the capital side, there's been some additional dollars placed into the pay-as-you-go capital line item for the purpose of buying some additional storage arrays to allow us to make sure that we have the proper capacity for those things that we don't store up in the cloud. Yeah, so there's some. Those are really the dramatic changes on the facility side. There's some incremental stuff, but most of it sits around that. Most service contracts or contracts associated with our software appear in the IT budget, and that's what you would expect. Over time, we'll move those out of the individual departments and move those into the IT department. Not in each and every case, but in vast majority of the cases, the license agreements and so forth appear within there. With a couple of exceptions, but overall that's where that stuff sits, so that we have an IT person looking at those kinds of contracts in concert with the individual departments. Plus it makes from a cost center point of view, it makes our departments look like they're supposed to. Right? We can view it. So IT is pretty straightforward, I think, the IT budget. Those are the dramatic changes.
So when, this is probably the Stan and you kind of question, when the official school budget goes to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or the whatever actuals, these kinds of costs get allocated into the school budget?
They should be reported. I always get the schedule wrong. I don't know if it's 1 or 19, but it's one of those schedules. I always get the stuff wrong. It should be included as part of the overall investment in the school district, as should other costs, to make sure that we're incorporating all of the costs. Because we do things, again, there are several towns that do this consolidated, but many don't. So you want to make sure you allocate the right percentage to each bucket.
This goes outside of IT a little bit, but does the school department and the municipal accounting, are they all on one software system? Do they share the same software for accounting for all of the? Yeah.
For most of the services, the answer is yes. So that's one of the transitions we're making this year. We operated off. We have begun a process about 18 months ago to move into a new financial software, one that is more consistent with what happens on a national level. We're moving to a product called Munis. We started that migration 18 months ago. Munis is the preeminent product relative to municipal governments, probably 170 municipalities in Mass, probably, I'm guessing numbers, hundreds upon hundreds nationally. We migrated to that system. That'll include your general ledger and your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, payroll, amongst other functions. The schools operated off this, so they moved with us. The systematic change or the operational change that we made, and I think we've talked to the group about it, is now we're using a single point of contact. So the town's payroll person is in essence doing the payroll for the entire town. It used to be a school payroll person and a town payroll person. So that's the change. But we all use the same software for things like accounting, back office stuff is all the same.
Budgets as well go into the Munis?
Yep, budgets go into Munis. Everything now, the difference with the product we had before is there were really 3 pieces to the financial equation to make it all work. By going to Munis, we now use one product, and that was the benefit to it. Was that, so we used to do a GL or general ledger stuff on one side, and then things like the tax billing with a different product, and they generally communicated well, but it's easier to deal with one company, quite frankly, and have a part of our sustainability plan is the idea of succession planning. and getting folks past the scary term, believing it means we're replacing you, with the fact that we want to create standardized systems in everything we do so that when any person leaves, from me to someone else, that the person who replaces them is likely qualified in an industry standard method of doing things. So bringing on products that most people in the business use means that when I bring in an employee to replace someone who leaves, they probably have experience in that platform, and I lose the downtime or the cost associated with that gap. So it's one of the unseen benefits of moving to a unified
That's a great
system.
benefit. No, I think it's great, and it looks like it's going to save us, like, overall, our software license cost will sort of start to creep down, and it's
Right.
fewer vendors to manage, and probably a lot. I'm sure that the efficiencies are one of the reasons why you're going to be able to process more paychecks with the same amount of a smaller amount of labor. So, or the same amount of labor processing more paychecks would be a better way to put it. So.
Yeah, part of it is delegate, pushing a little bit back in terms of how the material comes into the office, back to the individual departments.
Right.
To put on them a little more responsibility for taking that initial phase. There is a difference sometimes between school payroll and municipal payroll. Municipal payroll is relatively static, with the difference of maybe overtime in the public safety departments, but the rest of us,
Right.
we sort of spit that out, and the pay doesn't change much from pay period to pay period. Schools can have a number of different funding sources beyond the general fund, and therefore it requires a little bit of a different function, different operation. But by getting the school principals and school staff involved at a level that we can have them do the sort of first phase of things, it allows for the material that comes in to be more easily processed.
And the payrolls run off in Munis as well?
Yes, it's internal. Yep. So one employee runs our entire staff of payroll. So those questions about, does outsourcing make sense for us? We've got one staff person at, somewhere in the $55,000 range, processing hundreds upon hundreds of paychecks on a regular basis, producing the W-2s, reconciling that work. And from a cost per paycheck perspective, outsourcing that would be actually far more expensive.
Sure.
Yep.
That's great.
Another product in there where one of the changes Chris may have talked about is that we're implementing an online permitting system, something that we've never had. So in that license, as well as Viewpoint, which is a product we're using for online permitting, we're in the process now of integrating the data and integrating what's called a master address table. So for residents, when they want to apply for a permit, they don't pre-fill the address, because addresses get a little funny sometimes. Is it a capital R when you say rear? Is it a lowercase r? Is it 40-42? Is it 40-42? So as part of that, there'll be a master address table, and over time, residents will be able to get on, or builders will be able to get on and apply for permits online. Filling in the application generally will require sort of an online checkbox by the building inspector that it's approved. Eventually, that'll expand beyond the building side, include electrical, plumbing, health permits, and other related permits, and that'll all of that will get integrated back from a revenue perspective into our master financial system as well.
That's great, and that'll mean that the building department can spend more time inspecting and less time administering paperwork and managing paper. That's great. Good. Do we want to talk about facilities next?
Sure. Facilities continues to operate again. I think we've talked about that on several different occasions. It's a longer upfit. We moved to a centralized facility some years ago. I think it was the year before I arrived, we moved to centralized facilities.
Is there a page number you're looking at?
Oh, sorry.
Reference when you
Yep.
do that, please.
Page 184, and before that, when we talked about IT, we're on 182, so we've gone to
If
184.
we missed that, please call us up.
Yeah,
182.
yeah. And 184 is facilities.
So there's, facility department, again, is relatively static in terms of how we're operating. Steve Foster is our facilities director. His job somehow is to triage and manage 1 million square feet of assets and try to figure out where the priorities are in terms of service. We get, incrementally better every year in terms of making sure we have single point contracts for everything like electricians and elevator licensing and HVAC work, and I think we get better at that all the time. I don't know if we, in any near future, we'll work toward what I'd call a true facilities department, which would include a lot more staff and craftsmen and people who would do the work themselves. I think it's just a little tricky. The model doesn't seem to look a little bit about how this works in other communities. It can be a little tricky to pull off, quite frankly. It would require people to come from existing positions, rework their job responsibilities, make sure they have the proper skills to do all that kind of work. So right now, really, our review or our view on it is what Steve does is look at all of our assets, make sure we have a solid handle on how they operate, look at the big picture items, systems related, exterior, HVAC, those kinds of items. We do have an energy management system implemented as part of the ESCO project. Steve can go online, as can the rest of our staff, and manage and see the efficiency of our systems, get reminders when the efficiency of those systems drops below the expectation. So Steve's work really is higher level. He's really a management type person and not the sort of feet in the buildings, although you see him out there a lot at different buildings. Really, the role in the structure we have is that of a manager, managing contracts and managing the prioritization of asset improvement.
I think that was a great addition. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
we've had the facilities department now for
I'd
3
say
years, 4 years?
No, I'd say 5. It predates me by a year anyway. I think Steve started probably some months before me, so I'd say 5 would be a guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, though.
Really great. It's hard to imagine how we did it without facilities.
It's difficult, that's what.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed was that for FY17 goals is to the ESCO contract monitoring, compliance monitoring. So I didn't know if we'd gotten any reports back from that yet, or?
Sure. So we get, that's a great question. So in fact, I was talking to Steve today about that. We receive quarterly reports. I think the first one we may have received, we just got a new quarterly report in the last couple of days or last week. That might be the second or third quarterly report. They're benchmark reports. So what they do is they say, okay, remember this first started with an energy audit of all of our assets. There was $7 million worth of improvements identified, and that $7 million was sort of culled down to about $4 million based upon the payback period, primarily. We ended up investing $3.5 million, even though we had an appropriation of $4 million. That was a result of looking at certain, competitive bidding requirements. We did an unusual step of saying that we wanted competitive bidding on every measure, as opposed to just saying to the company, you have $4 million, do all these projects. That saved a couple $100,000 for us, and then the rebates actually were higher than we expected. So we expected about $250,000. We got back nearly $400,000 in rebates to offset the cost. So the project cost, at some point we have to do I think it's going to be an article to turn back the balance, but the appropriation was in the $4 million one range, and we spent $3.534, so there's close to a $700,000 turn back on that project. So these reports, really what they do is they say, okay, if your consultant said you needed to operate at this efficiency in every building, are you achieving that? You can't really compare energy cost to energy cost, because this year, as an example, right? Because you'd have to really match day-to-day average weather, as Bill knows. So what you're really doing is saying, okay, did you operate at the level of efficiency you expected in this building? Did you operate the number of hours? Did you operate at the temperature you anticipated? And what those reports show us is places, if there happens to be within a particular building, issues where we're not operating in the range anticipated. I think the first quarterly report identified 1 or 2 out of the range, which is not uncommon. One of them, quite frankly, was the senior center, which we've determined needs to operate a couple of degrees higher than some of other assets. And I know a lot about that.
For the senior citizens, I thank you.
So we had to change some of the measures and some of the set times to make sure that they operate in the particular way they need to. I think there was one other building that had a little bit of inefficiency in that way. And so what I've told Steve today is we should take those reports, we should put them on, post them to the town's website under the facility area, let folks get on at their leisure and look at the report. So we'll be doing that shortly, and you can certainly get on and look at that.
Great.
So it really tells you if we're meeting the mark. So it's largely around set points, meaning what did we set the temperature, what did we expect coming in that the temperature would be during certain times of the day, And are we meeting those marks, and are the systems working as efficiently as we expected? In all but, I think, 2 of the buildings were at like 98% compliance or something like that. And we've addressed the senior center issue, and I can't remember what the other one was, but it wasn't major.
Right.
So can I ask you, I mean, this is something that I think people always have some appeal to, you know, which is energy efficiency, notwithstanding the price of certain commodities at the time. Is there a way that, you know, having that depth is good, but some sort of an executive summary that kind of pulls that together, that, you know, whether that's a percentile or color-coded, or heat-coded, that shows kind of where we are in getting our return for this investment up front? You know, that 1 or 2 measures that somebody who says, just, right, we invested $3.5 million. Are we getting a okay return? Are we getting a great return? Are we getting a middle-of-the-road return? Is there an executive way to see that or illustrate that, Andrew?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I saw the first reports, I had sort of the same reaction, because I read best in summary, right? Or visual graphs are really good, too, for me. I think it's a little bit of struggle in terms of the way that even our consultant would say that the data is reported. Because the way I would have liked to see it was, here's actual energy consumption versus energy consumption. We are doing some of that internally. It's not the kind of stuff for the faint of heart in terms of light reading. So we're using a product in which we are actually tracking pure energy consumption of all forms of energy in every building. But it's not... Again, it's not a light read. You know?
And you don't have a baseline either.
Well, you don't have and again, if you look at these 2 winters alone, they're really interesting winters, right? So we had more 50-degree days than any time in history, right? But we had one particular, you know, probably the coldest day in the last 10 years. So some of that, then you have the cost of energy has dramatically changed. The cost of energy through N-Grid last year was about, if I'm getting the numbers right, close to 5 cents more than it was this year during their peak period. And then you look at, because most of our stuff is gas, but some is not. So again, developing that baseline. There was a baseline done as part of the audit and raw consumption, but really what you'd be looking at, and again, we'll look at that and find a way to try to summarize it. Some of the stuff is graphical, which I think actually is helpful. It's not the kind of dollars for sort of dollars thing you'd expect, because you need to know how many days in the period, almost like your own utility bills, how many days in that period, how many therms were used, what was the average temperature that generated those therms. So you get into some really sort of interesting nuance. But we'll look at the reports that they provide and talk, so everybody knows, I think you folks know, we brought on our own independent consultant before proceeding with the project to tell us what we need to be looking for achievement, and also retain that person to evaluate the first year results to make sure we were doing it, because some of the information is just beyond us, right? And he's assured us we're complying with that. But yeah, we'll find some way. Graphical may be the best way.
So that's an interesting, the whole thing makes it very complex, because we said we'd get a guarantee from, is it EBSCO?
EBSCO. No, Ameresco.
That we, at the minimum, we would save this per year. But it's like, how are you being able to measure that?
Yep. Well, you can measure, you just end up backing into it in a way that's slightly different. So if you took the cost in any one year, let's say a building, all of our assets, let's say all of our assets cost us $1 million to operate from a gas, I'm just picking one utility. Then if you divide that by the therms and the rate, you can come back and say cost per unit.
Correct.
Right? So what the reports help us understand is, are we, and most of the measures are not about making energy cheaper, they're about making consumption go down.
Right.
And so what the reports tell us is the consumption milestones are being met.
That's, yeah, I can see that.
And so that's the only way really to do it, right?
Yep.
Is to make sure your consumption, which you extrapolated backwards to begin with, your consumption is tracking the way you intended it to be within the parameters to do that. And the reports indicate that, in fact, they are, with really marginal exceptions that don't change the game too much.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Great.
So the discussions that we had with you at FinCom at that time about, towards the end, about getting a bid for each and every section.
Yes.
That was quite a
That was $700,000, yes.
Yes.
Yep, that change about getting a bid for every the service associated with every measure, that methodology, I don't have the exact breakdown, but I know that the dollars left from the original appropriation are close to 700,000, and maybe 200,000 to 300,000 were rebates, and the balance was from competitively bidding every measure.
Well, that was, I guess, in retrospect,
Good decision.
it's good we all had the,
Maybe we can put that in the report.
well.
Is that the good, it's a good call?
I think it was a good call.
Good, because I think it's always good. I mean, I had to do that today. I told people at my company that we'd get a sublease for this space that we took, and then I said, we're gonna make back this, and we made back a little better than this. So it's always nice when you can go back and say, I told you
It's
this.
true.
We did a little better.
Keep that when it doesn't work the other way. Have that on the good side of the ledger.
It was so confusing to me at the time how you were going to be able to execute that.
Yeah.
In theory, it sounded great. Oh, we'll just, those things. You did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier to check if energy rates had stayed the same, but at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm glad they didn't, right? So energy costs went down.
Right. No, I mean, last winter, I was talking to people to buy energy contacts at like 14 cents a kW.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was 18 the year before. Was it 18? On gas was 18.
Okay, no, I was talking about electric.
Electric, yeah.
We were at like 8 or 9, and it was going to go up with N-Star to
Oh,
like
I see.
14 or 15 last year. And I bought a contract for 6 months I bought a hedge at like 12.5. I don't know what it is today, but it's certainly a lot.
The winter
less.
rate, I want to say the winter rate's 13. I have it wrong. And we competitively bid our energy.
Right, so you had 3 years.
Yeah,
you
we
had a 3-year
competitively bid
contract.
that, and so so we've done that for a while, which is the right thing to do. We're usually a little ahead of the market, which is
Right.
positive. And we will have an article this year to do an electrical aggregation, so residents can take advantage of the same initiative. We would competitively bid on the benefit of behalf of the residents. Residents would be able to get lower cost electricity than they pay with N-Grid. N-Grid, by the way, doesn't have any issue with it because they make no money on that component of the bill.
Right.
It's energy, they pay, it's a commodity, they pay a fee, they pass it along to the ratepayer, so we'd be able to pass along to the ratepayer some savings. It's the homeowner, which is great. We also likely, related to the same thing, probably proceeding with an article to adopt the stretch code as the final component to become a green community. 160 communities have participated. A couple of years ago, there was a discussion, and for a number of legitimate reasons, we didn't proceed in that direction. But I think we're moving in that direction now to become a green community. Comes with it $150,000 to $200,000 a year in grants, entitlement grants for energy improvements and other related benefits to the community, everything from education to efficiency in continuing an ESCO-like program, because part of that program is a commitment to start working to continue to reduce energy consumption. And so, pretty excited about the prospect that we would have some success in becoming a green community. Should be neat.
So that's worth, as you say, up to maybe $150,000?
Yeah, annually, every community, it's a combination of population and some socioeconomics, but using an average, what I'm seeing, I think $150,000 to $160,000 a year that we could use for the LED lighting replacement, as an example, upgrading some of the systems that maybe didn't have the same payback, so we didn't pay for them through ESCO, but using that list and continuing to make energy efficiency improvements townwide. And then there are supplemental grants that if you had a specific program, you could apply for additional funding from the state for grant monies, but every year you'd be entitled to about in North Andover I've seen different numbers, but between $150,000 and $175,000 a year that could be reinvested in.
Is there a statutory framework that's thrown all over this, like the ESCO thing?
Yeah, it's called the Green Communities Act. I don't have the exact site on it, but it's called the Green Communities Act. It was passed, I'm going to guess, 0809 range. There's now a division within the Commonwealth called the Green Communities Division. It's under the Department of Energy Resources. The commissioner for the Department of Energy Resources is a North Andover resident, and spoke to her yesterday, and I think it's be nice to have us complete the process. So there's 5 steps to it. We did a number of them some years ago. The stretch code was the last piece, and we feel comfortable that we have an opportunity to get it done this year at town meeting. Be great.
So
have you talked to the buildings inspector about this? And-
I've spoken to builders rather than building inspector,
Quite a
yes.
bit of,
They-
the change of
correct.
stretch, to
Yes.
have the stretch code was kind of an
The-
issue with a lot of builders.
Yeah, it's a great question. So 5 years ago, the stretch code, which is the fifth and most difficult provision, while there are two difficult provisions for communities, we easily solved one. As of right, zoning for manufacturing of renewable energy was a big issue with some communities. That wasn't an issue here. We defined the Osgood Landing property as that, as Susan is probably aware. The stretch code 5 years ago, the stretch code actually is embedded in the building code, but the stretch code provisions within the building code were far more onerous on builders. So it meant that when you built new homes or added additions to homes or did remodeling of homes, there were certain requirements which were above the basic building level. And some people wanted to do that to the homes, but others may not want to, and there might be a cost associated with it. Today, the stretch code that's within the building code is in essence the building code and the stretch code are almost synonymous today. So the building code evolved to the point that it incorporated many of the stretch code components. In fact, the latest building code, which will be released either July 1 or January 1st, eliminates remodeling, renovations, or expansions from being compliant with the stretch code. Because the building code has changed so much to incorporate those provisions, they're now saying they're not necessary. So in talking to builders, I've spoken of prominent builders in the community. Their opinion is that where they were 5 years ago is totally different than where they are today.
Which is great.
Yeah, so it's a good opportunity, I think.
Oh, sure. So we did IT, we did facilities. In terms of purchasing, which I guess is on page 186.
186.
I was just trying to figure out.
True.
No, I don't think so.
No? Where is? I had it. Oh,
It's
sorry.
under admin support, which is
Admin support.
181.
Yeah. Okay.
So we this year, through the budget, by the way, incorporated those other back office operations, which wouldn't normally be worth separate pages, under one category called admin support. So payroll, purchasing, and the AP side is now under it's really back office support. So we've, instead of having separate pages, because they're not really departments, they're parts of departments.
Right.
We've incorporated those into a category called admin support.
Okay. So I was trying to figure out, when I saw that it had purchasing,
Yes.
and then Ray usually does the purchasing, right? He's kind of like the procurement officer.
Ray is the procurement officer. I'm by statute, the chief procurement officer. He's the purchasing agent. Yep.
Right,
So
purchasing agent,
50%
okay.
of Ray's salary is within the town manager budget, and
Right.
50% sits within this central area.
Oh,
He's the
okay.
purchasing officer for the entire town, school
Right.
and town. Yep.
Okay, so then when the, all right, I know what it was. So, yeah, okay. So the total head count is really one person in payroll and half of Ray. Okay, that makes sense. I was looking at the wrong column, half of
We
Ray.
haven't figured out which half, but it's half of Ray.
Okay, all right. That makes sense then. I'm all set with that one. I don't, does anyone else have any questions on that? I get it.
So we're showing, just so you know, we're showing the AP clerk is zero. In essence, we're picking up the AP clerk. There's not a perfect way to do some of these things, but the dollars associated with the AP clerk actually works within the school side, but it's a function that spends, this is a little bit about our sharing, right? So where the payroll person is primarily sort of a town position doing school work, the AP position is now primarily a school position doing town work. That position sits really within the school budget with some funding through here.
Right.
So it wasn't sort of an ideal way to report that. We're still working through how to report portions of people.
Right.
So Ray is in the same office every day, physically.
Ray is in the same office. He's in my office. Yeah. He's in my office. Depends on the day.
Okay. All right, and then The only other, I think if we're looking at things, and I could be wrong, but we have the town manager's budget on page 113.
113?
So do we want to take a quick, I don't really have any major comments on the town manager's budget, but if anyone does, I think we should reflect that we looked at page 113 to 116 and
Which ties into,
I don't have dollar questions as much as
Pages 1
topic questions. Signed community compact program.
to 3, doesn't it?
As a part of your accomplishment, give me one paragraph or less.
Yeah, so one of the governor's early initiatives, headed up by the lieutenant governor, was to create a series of best practices that they would link to certain, one, they would provide technical resources, the state would, if the town agreed to certain best practices, of which we have a pool of items to pick from. The idea is what may make sense for Lee, Mass. doesn't make sense for North Andover, Mass. That if we would agree to implement certain best practices, they would in turn agree to give us the technical assistance through either funding or staff, meaning their staff, to complete that particular best practice, and/or increase our opportunity for grants to fund those initiatives. So, I don't know how many communities today, well over 100 communities have signed community compacts. We're one of those. I was fortunate to be asked by the lieutenant governor to be on the steering committee of mayors and managers statewide to sort of develop the program. In our case, our focus is on an initiative called the Merrimack Valley Means Business Initiative. So 2008, the Regional Planning Authority, Merrimack Valley Regional Planning Authority, along with the towns and cities in Merrimack Valley, created this concept that we should partner to bring business to the region. So we may be a location for a business, or we may be the home for people who are going to work in that business. But the idea was that we should promote the region from an economic development perspective rather than just promoting one town at a time. The idea was great. There was some traction around it, made some progress early on, and then sort of died on the vine. And so newer groups of mayors and managers now sit around the table. I meet with my peers. In fact, I met with them today. We meet every 4 or 6 weeks, talk about things happening in the region. There was an increased interest to want to sort of promote it again. I think centered, quite frankly, around the efforts of the mayor of Lawrence, who really sees economic development as a partnership. He's been great to work with. And so we want to add some more energy to that. And we've talked about branding the region, advertising the region. We're also moving forward possibly with our own initiatives for advertising from a business perspective. And so we think some enhancements can be made to the website that's been developed, increase the brand, increase the marketing. And so the initiative that I recommended was, instead of us doing our own best practice just for North Andover, was to encourage the region to do a best practice. We got support from Methuen and Andover and Salisbury. The other communities in the region agreed, but they had already submitted their compacts with their own best practices, which that wasn't in. And so the state agreed to use that regional initiative as a best practice, and will be providing us with technical resources and grant opportunities to enhance the marketing and promotion of the concept of Merrimack Valley Means Business. That's the idea.
Very good.
Work in progress.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to sell in the region. I think sometimes we love the region. We think about ourselves as Merrimack Valley, and then we probably forget that not everybody knows where it is. And so where other regions and places have to create names and titles, that sounds negative, not intended to be. You know, the Gold Coast was South Shore near New Bedford, right? We already have that. But when you travel...
Brand awareness is not there.
Brand awareness, thank you. When you travel down 114 outside of the Merrimack Valley, which happens somewhere around the Middleton line, or if you travel, in a different direction, we lose that because we think the brand extends beyond the borders of the valley, and it doesn't. So we need to bring that out to everybody else. We need to promote the region. It's a great region, has a lot to offer. So we should be telling people that.
Yeah, I mean, the Metro West, people know what Metro West is, you have a picture of what that.
Basically, we don't have a territory in Craigslist. Actually, there's Merrimack Valley now.
Yeah.
So,
But I think that makes a lot of
Yep.
sense.
So today, there is such a website. There's Merrimack Valley Means Business website. You can go on. It's linked to most of our individual websites. On that website, you can see a little blurb about each of the communities. You can actually connect onto a corporate inventory of available properties in the entire region. It's linked to one of the statewide services for that. Again, it's an improvement because we've started to add some energy behind doing those things, but we think there's more that be done.
So we might have more collaborations between, let's say, the governor and the mayors of the various cities and towns. I mean, we have the one in Boston, that collaboration.
Yeah, we have a lot of...
that brought in GE.
Yeah, no, I
That'd
thought
be nice.
it's interesting too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw that Wayfair just announced they're going to put like 1,000 jobs in Maine, and then an article today said they don't know if they're going to have the talent there, which was really interesting. Because,
1,000 jobs?
1,000 jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
Mayfair.
What?
How close to the border with New Hampshire?
Yeah. Where?
Well, some are in Brunswick, which I.
Oh, not to worry.
And some a little bit closer to.
It's about
Portland?
education talent.
Yeah, no, I was just.
They can do
I was
that.
surprised because it was interesting. I thought because I hadn't heard of a big. I mean, 800 jobs these days. It's not like the old days where you could get like a Western Electric or
Right.
land a. You know, the 800 jobs in GE. You'd think the whole. It was like 4 days worth of front page headlines.
It's true.
It's a whole different world now in terms of site location and things like that. And I just thought it was really interesting, and I thought, but you have to catch a lot more 800-person companies. You have to catch a lot more 100 and 200-person companies, and then maybe the 800 one comes. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's that plan, that's that vision piece that
Right.
I see in our goal for next year, trying to develop that more.
Yeah, I think what gets lost a little bit is I think Bill's point is great, is that I think sometimes we get caught up with how businesses, we miss how businesses operate today. Like you said, you need a lot of, we had an employer here at 12, 11, depending on whose count you give, something north of 10,000 jobs, right? Today in that facility, there's dozens of businesses. I've met several of the owners. They're great companies. They employ Thomas's company. I did a great walk around that, and that's a great company, 26 employees, right? So we talk to people who visit North Andover about possible business opportunities, and maybe they're investing $100 million, $150 million, 15 jobs. So it is changed, right? When you hear 800 jobs, it sounds like it's the world's about to change. It is changed. The employee count around these jobs has dramatically changed. A lot of the nature of the industry, we had Solo Cup here, if you've ever driven by that facility, a massive facility. It was back when those kinds of facilities were common in the United States, and they're just less common. Big facilities employing a lot of people. The nature of all work in all industries has dramatically changed in that way. But we have great companies. Watts Water, by the way, is about to open the largest in the country training facility for their kind of product here in North Andover within their structure. It's on Turnpike. They're a great company. We have a number of businesses that operate. But again, it's more smaller footprint stuff, right?
Okay. Great, okay. And then that's pretty much it for all your divisions, right? Like
Thanks.
I was just trying to think, like, I'd have to look at I'd have to cheat and look at the org chart and see. The town clerk?
Yeah, well, anything that's not school is mine.
Okay.
Simple way to look at it.
I knew that. I just didn't want to.
In terms of the operational stuff, yeah, the clerks, most of them are operating at or below. Clerk has one more election this year, so the costs are up around that election. But
That was the bump, I'm looking at page
Yep.
131.
One
There's a
addition.
bump for $10,000 almost for
is that on the clerks?
the clerk's budget
Yep.
for outside professional services, election related.
Well, the outside professional services, the bump in 10,000 for that, you'll see within the initiative, is the recodification project that we're going to do on the town bylaw. So we're going through the process. If you look at the town bylaw, it's somewhat shotgun. We're recodifying the town bylaw, and that'll include an internet component, internet interface, which is common in a lot of communities. so that you'll be able to get on. So if you went to the company's website, actually, there's a couple of companies out there. I don't want to foreshadow which company we may go with, but two major companies that do this. You actually go, if you want to, you can go on the company's website, and you can look up every municipality. The format for the bylaws are consistent, it's standard. It gives you a annotation list of when all the bylaws were changed. So if it was changed in 85 and 92, you get that sort of list. And so in the professional services for the clerk's budget is the process of recodifying or recodifying, depending on who you speak to, the bylaw.
So is this project going to be completed next year?
Yes. Yep, it'll be near the July 1 start, and company comes in and starts the process. One thing it will require, if it requires them to resequence the bylaw, then there would be an article on the next town meeting that takes all of those changes that are required, because we do have a sequencing issue as well, and promotes or proposes that we change the bylaw less out of content and more out of sequencing. Yep. We're doing the same exercise through the master planning process, and the first step of the master planning process is a recodification of the zoning bylaw to do a similar thing, to create a standardization and a front end that's more user-friendly. Today, for both of our bylaws, you go along and you see the PDF version, and it's great. You go to find a section, and good luck. So, yeah. So part of what we're doing is the first step of the master planning process is recodifying the zoning bylaw as well. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
On page 138, 139, 140, 141.
Can you explain the difference between, and even before, the Community and Economic Development mission statement and the Planning Department mission statement?
Sure.
Are they two separate departments but have overlapping missions?
Yes.
Thank you.
Longer answer?
Next question.
That's good enough. I'm good with that. Okay, so let me ask the
I
follow-up.
said yes. I said, for the first time, I've given a one-word answer in my life. Yes, I'm 53, it took me a long time. The answer is yes.
Okay, so on 138, the 110 for 2017 request, is that for that master plan build-out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Not build-up, master plan.
Master planning, I'm sorry.
What I would refer to as a visioning process.
Okay. And then the other question I had is on 138, it looks like a decline in the staff, and I didn't know if you shifted staff roles around to different departments, or if actually community development has less people going to have less people.
Yes to the first part. See, I'm doing good. No, sure. Yeah, it's a movement. It's,
I swear I didn't prep
I couldn't answer that one just yes. There was two parts to it. Yes, we're moving. So the original. So, the Department of Community and Economic Development, which sometimes goes by. Just can't fit all the words on some of these pages.
Yeah.
Is the division under which your land use boards sit. So, Community and Economic Development Director Eric Kafori.
Yes.
Below him, so he's a division director.
Okay.
And he manages the division, which I would refer to as the land use boards.
Okay.
Planning, zoning, conservation, health, building.
Okay.
So the idea is, and again, scalability, if you're in a town of 15,000, all these things are separate functions. You get to bigger towns, 25, 30,000 and bigger, you have a division head that makes sure that those functions are coordinating their activities. So that, because a lot of them are either regulatory or land use regulatory, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, yes. So in that case, under this budget, the Assistant Director of Community and Economic Development is being moved into the Planning Division
That's what
to increase her focus on the planning side.
I see.
And we're bringing on a staff planner, have brought on a staff planner instead of a town planner.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Health Department, the Conservation Department, the Building Department, so all the other
others you
departments,
mentioned, yeah.
they all operate with 2 professional staff and an assistant.
Got it.
Our planning side, I don't know why, it's been this way for a while. Our planning side, which you could argue needs to be up here, was 1 professional and 1 staff. We've refocused the department to say, this is too important. We need 2 professional staff focused on planning with a staff member associated with it, so that's what we did. Yep.
Great. Okay, page 108, general fund debt service. If you just wouldn't mind educating me a little bit on the first section that talks about debt service and how it seems we're projecting up.
Right. You mentioned an expense, an increase in expense for
For debt service.
debt service.
So
this
debt
year.
service is the principal and interest repayment on loans.
Mhm.
So that,
So are we paying more, or are we taking on more debt, so thus we're paying more?
in this particular case, the upward swing in the total debt service paid would be the result of incurring more debt because, although well within the thresholds of what we anticipated, the rate structure hasn't changed. So that could change for two reasons. The money we're borrowing is more expensive. That hasn't happened. It's been pretty static. Or two, because we're choosing to take on more debt. We're taking on more debt because that debt is associated with a facility plan. So our overall capital plan, but primarily driven by the facility plan. But we're doing that and staying within our 5% or below standard. So from year to year, it can be how we borrowed the money. It could be interest rate specific, or it could be more debt load. In this particular case, it's probably a little bit of everything, but predominantly taking on a little more, carrying a little more debt from the facilities project. Yep,
For this fiscal, for fiscal 17.
correct.
All right, and so if we went back and to look at the results of the capital budgeting, we would just follow it all the way out, and
Yep.
we would find so many, this is 10 years and this is 15 years, or,
We have
yes, okay. so
fully
it links
detailed.
right into
same
that.
thing. So if you look at the capital
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
that's, when we calculate the
That's what I was-
percentage, we take the debt service, we put that percentage in for you. This is just the 1-year view, 1-year actual cost to the debt service that's in the capital plan.
Okay, so
Yep.
that's what that.
You'll see a
increase is.
dramatic decline in that beginning in, I'm going to be off a year, fiscal 1920,
Yeah.
as the excluded debt is coming off the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, the excluded debt associated with the purchase of Osgood Hill and the building of the high school.
Right. Yeah, it goes from an 18 to 4.4 to 2.7 and 19. So that's on the general fund side, yeah.
Yep.
So we have 45,000 of excluded debt. in this
Well, the excluded
total.
debt is more than that.
Yeah, it's 1.7 is the total.
Right.
The dollar change is
Yeah, the dollar
45.
change.
The dollar
is-
change is
yeah.
45. Yeah, the excluded debt is more than that.
Yeah.
I think our debt service drops by hundreds of thousands
Yeah.
when the excluded debt
The
starts to
dollar
roll off.
change is 45 this year. Okay.
I think it's 19 and 20 are the first years of the Osgood Hill purchase come off,
Mm.
$4.9 million.
But the excluded, that Mr. Mailer is not included in the 5%, right?
No,
Yeah, we include all of it.
Oh, is it?
yeah.
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 Okay.
Well, do we do that in the capital plan? That's a good question. I have to look back. I don't think we do include the excluded debt in the percentage calculation, because excluded debt is brought in as an equal and offsetting amount of revenue.
Right.
So excluded debt has, it's a wash. It's additional taxes coming in, that's what we mean by excluded. So beyond your base tax amount, the town raised dollars through taxation to offset dollar for dollar the amount of the excluded debt. So it really is, comes in over here and comes off over here. So from the point of view of having a conversation about percentage of debt service, this piece is irrelevant to that. Yeah.
So then asking the
$1 million question?
strange question, so does that mean taxes go down when we're
Yes.
done paying that?
Yes. Do they go down? Technically, yes. With all things else being equal, with everything else being equal, then yes, taxes go down when the excluded debt. Debt exclusions are temporary, typically 20-year, increases in taxes for the purpose of paying for specific capital improvements. The taxes are raised each year to cover that debt service for the 20 years, typically 20 years of the note, and when it's paid off, then you stop asking, you stop including in the tax bill the amount associated with that debt service. Yes. That's the difference between an exclusion and an override. Override permanently changes the bar, an exclusion temporarily changes the bar.
This question is just maybe a little naivety on my part, but excluded debt is subject to town meeting vote,
Excluded debt is subject to town-wide vote.
town-wide vote. So the question then really is.
And yes, yes
why-
to the first part, but adding the next one.
Yeah, okay. The next question really is, why would I expect to see the principal amount, any kind of amount go up on the excluded debt? If I say that the debt is straight lined.
I didn't say the debt is straight line. So there's two ways to borrow money. We're not allowed to borrow money on increasing. We can borrow money on level principal or level debt. But we can't borrow money on an increasing debt schedule. We can't do that in a municipality. So you can see principal increase change. It just depends on how we borrow the dollars.
Okay.
So principal increase change means the nature of how we borrowed the money. So you can see principal change, but all it's saying is in the year, for the period of the excluded period, the dollars associated with raising whatever so let's use Stevens Estate. $4.9 million was borrowed in 1998, but the passage of town meeting was around 1995, give or take a year, to buy the 150 acres at Osgood Hill in the Stevens Estate. We borrowed that money. For every year that the debt service, principal and interest for that $4.9 million appears as an expense we must pay, once town meeting has approved that and the town-wide referendum vote has approved the exclusion, we in turn then can add to the tax bills the relative cost of exactly that. But the principal and interest amounts can change from year to year. Is that what you're asking?
I sort of, not quite, but I think I actually answered my question. If I look down the next line carefully, the interest on that probably associated same debt is going down. So that makes perfectly great sense. Okay, I have no problem. So your interest is going down because you're paying more principal.
Which over time, over 20 years, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the same amount.
Correct.
Sort of down.
It's like your mortgage.
Feels like your mortgage.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't
As long as
see
the
the same
interest
one.
goes down, right?
Yep.
What you can't do in a municipality is sort of sell low and
No.
borrow the money so that there is.
Well, you don't have arms and stuff like that.
You do put some rules on us.
All right.
I have.
I had a question on page 58 on the.
I was going to go to 67.
So,
neighborhood.
So on 58, the stabilization fund looks great. The town capital stabilization fund looks great. In terms of the OPEB stabilization fund, are we planning on a contribution in FY17?
Yes.
Okay.
So remember, there's two different funds. There's the OPEB stabilization fund and the OPEB trust fund, right? So the trust fund, the appropriation last year was $500,000. We're just completing the process to have that go off to the state to manage the funds, which the $500,000 is the threshold to do that. They're allowed to invest in more appropriate vehicles for return than, now it's going to be a schizophrenic market year, so God knows, up and down. But over in the long term, we're better off there than our own 75 basis point return or whatever the number is. 250 is the number that at this point, it looks like I'm still in the process of developing the warrant.
You are? Okay.
Yeah, I'm still developing.
Process of,
Yeah.
when does that get developed?
Warrant, the selectmen will look at the warrant for the first time on March 7th and vote to close the warrant on March 21st.
Okay.
Warrant's pretty benign warrant.
So that goes to trust fund?
Yeah, there'd be 250. I think one thing, we also included in this budget a $50,000 line item appropriation, so an operating budget contribution to the same trust fund, something that within the policies that we all agreed to included a component which says we not only need to just move money from free cash into this, we need to start making an operating commitment. It's one of those pegs up the ladder to get to AAA rating, which is a important goal to us. So there's $50,000 in the operating budget that you have in front of you that will be contributed to that same fund. So at this point, I'm assuming 250.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And is there the OPEB stabilization fund, the $1 million that's in there, are we gonna? So if I get this right, like the trust fund is like a tighter lockbox than the stabilization fund to use. And that's the reason why we went to the trust fund, because that's what the bond rating agencies wanted, right?
That's fair.
And then the stabilization fund, $1 million in there is just going to stay in the stabilization fund, or eventually we're going to
I think
together, or
that's a really good question. I think the longer term play would be there's not a rush here, right? So I think what I heard as the feedback to the first year was, Bless you. You know, what is the future? We know OPEB's a problem. We know everybody wants to fund OPEB. What's the right way? And it'd be great to know that there was a handbook out there that actually gave you exactly the right way, but there's no clear handbook. So we all heard the feedback that we wanted to start offsetting the deficit, but we also heard the feedback that what if this all sort of goes in a different way? What if there's a different method to fund it? What if the federal government backs off its position on it? So the approach really is incremental. So I think as it relates to this, if 3, 4, 5, there's not a rush here. 3, 4, 5 years from now, we feel like there's going to be an increased focus by the federal government on where we stand and how much we have to fund OPEB, or then we can talk about moving these dollars from a stabilization into the trust. If the trust performs in the way we hope it does and it starts to grow, I think, although the rating agencies don't like this, like they like the $500,000 and the trust, I think we're doing both. We're showing them the right signs, and I think this gives us a little bit of a hedge to making sure that if for some reason it all changes and OPEB becomes irrelevant to everybody, then I don't know what's going to happen if that's the case. But it gives us a little more flexibility with these dollars, or if there's a true, like beyond a rainy day that comes up, it gives us a little flexibility to it.
So the way we could look at it really is we have $1 million, and then we'll put, say, 300 million, 500, 300, so we have about 1 point. So we're looking at a big picture.
1.8.
We have about 1.8 set aside against, and we're trying to get to 4.3 as kind of our.
Yep.
You probably could never have enough money in it, but
Liabilities, 86 million, sorry. That goes into the discussion, right? What is 4 million versus 86? But I do think there's an expectation that every well-run community contributes to this. So I think we're heading in the right direction. But the number would be 250 at this point.
okay. And then just sort of wrapping my mind around it, because I have trouble with big numbers. Well, maybe Tim can think this one through, but if you say like an $86 million liability, how many years out does that look?
No, that's a full lookout. So that assumes, it assumes all existing employees and their anticipated retirement and their actuarial life.
Right.
So if we think of our lives in the form of actuarial tables, which is fine, I guess, then that assumes that. So those are actuarially based.
Right.
It takes all of our existing employees, their pay, their health insurance, and assumes that they will have benefits through their actuarial life, which means the man in the room will not be here as long as the woman.
Yeah.
It's all for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have,
Page 60. I'm sure you could ask this question. I don't know. I see that nice negative number on the bottom.
On the right-hand side, bottom.
Yes.
Yes. So I guess the question would be, and Tim explained this shows up every year looking like this with negative numbers.
Close. They look remotely
Close.
familiar, don't they, Tim?
Yeah, you could lay it side by side.
So how do you reconcile with that negative number? I mean, what is,
In the second
you look
column?
at the plans and you say we're, every year we're going more into deficit? How do we overcome the deficit?
The real neat and simple. You are $4.8 million off the mark in year 21.
And my contract ends in 2020.
There you go.
Ba-boom.
Should have back-end loaded it. Just put it all at the back.
Let it ride, baby.
The good news is we do 5-year forecasting. And the expectation, and I say it right up front at the beginning of every 5-year forecast, every day I travel beyond today, I'm going to get more conservative about my approach. So the estimates as it relates to this is all linked to a very simple put in some percentages, and it kicks out the backside of the schedule, right? So the way I forecast, and I've been telling this to my thing for a couple of years, and I'm pretty consistent about it, is that you typically will see a manageable number in year one, sometimes even like a $2 surplus in year one, and then we'll start to show the deficits, because in reality, if we only grow at those levels, if things don't change, then that does become a little more of a reality. And it really, quite frankly, is to a certain extent a reasonable reminder about getting ahead of where we are. Because the percentages, I don't have them attached to this, but the percentages associated with that, this isn't an assumption of declining revenue or an assumption of 10% increase in expenditure. These are modest 3% to 3.5% growth. Yeah, these are not, along with the fact that we assume some really conservative state aid numbers, but this year is a great example. The governor's budget, the state aid increases are actually less than last year. The economy has not, not radically changed. So this gives us an idea of what happens, could happen, and every year our job is to try to manage the next year, and then that fifth year it gives us a reminder that we can't be talking about large increases, because this is what happens even if they're sort of slightly ahead of where we anticipate. Yep. So I look at this really as a
Talking point?
yeah, really is. It's far more a talking point than me pointing to the third line I'm down in 2020 and saying, oh my God. But there are some real numbers in here. The retirement appropriation, as an example, comes right off a funding schedule from our retirement system. That's an etched in stone number. And so
you can calculate.
Yep. And so when you have those kinds of etched in stone figures, especially at 8% increase, you incorporate those as well. And it starts to show you that when many years ago when I was in Chelsea, I remember we used to go through the budget process in the council. There was one council who always came in, and I shouldn't say this in public, I guess, but he used to always come in and he would say, this is a $100 million budget. There is no reason you cannot cut 10% out of this budget. And so we would go off, come back to the next meeting, and we would come back with that sort of an interesting calculation. We took the $100 million and started to break down what was optional or what we could change versus those things which were at least to some extent fixed cost, and we would come down to $1 million. Pretty close. If you want to even break down this budget, if you really think about it, you take employment contracts, you take those things that really this is a all-in 100 and whatever it is, close to $100 million when you add the enterprise funds. Not a lot of, you get debt service, you have health insurance, if you bake in the employee costs, you really have very little flexibility. So we would come back and then say, you're right, but this is the discretionary piece, this $1 million, and so we're going to cut the 10%. It's $100,000, right? And that's really, in large part, what we talk about. It's nibbling around the edges.
Well, you really illustrate here that there are only a few big levers, ultimately. When you look at this, you've got revenue sources, and
Yep.
either those grow ahead of your expenses, or you have very little discretion to work with.
But you're using an inflationary number, or an increase. If you were to look back and do the calculations, had expenses grown only by inflation, and you could probably say yes if you control it very, very tightly.
Yep.
But at a certain point, you cut yourself too thin.
Yeah, I think so. It's a great question. So remember the question from last meeting about contracts, and the question is, well, how do you do that if you don't know where you're going and what it's going to look like? We do. This is our scan of the landscape. And so it comes from two places. One we're good at, and I think one we're very good at. So the one we're good at is managing the expectations within some of those larger dollar costs to make sure that we stay on the plan and we communicate as we have. Stan, I always appreciated Stan's repeated comments. He doesn't use them as more. There was always this belief there was a bag of money. The bag. What's the bag? The bag disappeared when we started telling everybody exactly what all of the revenue sources and expenditure sources were. Right when we started to tell everybody exactly what we were doing, the bag went away. Right, and so this is the same thing. So we share this with our employees too. We share these kinds of conversations. The second piece that I think we're extremely good at is we think we're willing, school and town, to think of things that are not traditional. And I think that effective local governments do non-traditional things. And the ones that want to keep on repeating the same way they did things end up arguing that they can't get things done, or that things don't work, or it doesn't work, we can't do it. So whether it's the third in the state to have a sped stabilization, the only community I know that's dealing with some kind of curriculum-specific funding, shared services exist in some places and not in others. We're willing to think and try things that others don't, and that helps that delta shrink, because we're willing to creatively try to get around that.
And I'm saying no doubt.
Yeah.
I've gone to the last 2 town meetings. I don't remember, and I'm sure this maybe was covered, but I don't remember seeing this up on a large screen before all the deliberations and voting. And yet, this is
Yeah.
the education that tells people, listen, we are going to have issues. Luckily, the town is very conservative and very cost-conscious and doing a great job, but as a town, not as...
Yeah, because my message and your message are different. We're saying different things. So first of all, this is done as a presentation of a joint meeting between Finance Committee, School Committee, and the Selectmen. It's televised, and this document is printed for everybody to see and appears on our website.
Mhm.
2, it's not the lead-off to town meeting at all, because I'm not saying that we're heading in that direction. What I'm saying is that, for me, it is our baseline for conversation, so that we're always cognizant of our message, of our needs.
Yes.
It doesn't tell me that we're heading, so...
I'm sorry, I'm not using the right words.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
It tells me, what it should tell everybody, and I think, and I'm not trying to put words in it, what it should tell everybody is that, and I think I said this to Tim a couple of years ago, other than the numbers being different, this is the same appearance as the 5-year forecast I did 23 years ago. Because it is municipality 101. It is municipal finance 101. The spigot is only so big, and we work through the spigot, and how effective we are in making sure that I'm actually don't usually show the 17 number as a deficit, so that was a little bit of funny here. So it really is a little bit of, I don't know what I did there. It's a little bit of an education around municipal government. That's what it is. That's all. Yeah. So I don't put it at town meeting, because from my perspective, at that point, we're sort of not post-budget, but we're at a different point. But this document and its detail it's why it's the first thing we do in the budget cycle.
Yes.
And the more people who want to see and hear that, that's great.
No, I think that, I totally agree, it's the right message. It's that, we just have to be very careful on the margins. And, every marginal cost, every marginal revenue, we have to examine and, constantly recalibrate and think about things are getting there. Because to me, it's all about, I can't think of the right name, but it's kind of like I was just thinking about it today, but it's an economist who has this theory about like a string quartet. He uses the example of a string quartet, right? Like you have a string quartet, you're going to have 4 people, right? That's going to be the same as in 1600 as it is in 2050, right? But then you got like guys making widgets, right? And all of a sudden your widget price keeps coming down, you automate it, you use technology, you reduce the price of that. So all of a sudden, in 1600, your widget compared to the salary of a violinist wasn't that big, but the multiple increases tremendously over time, and we buy we're buying the string quartet. We're buying the people who provide the services. There's no way to outsource this. Technology can help at the margins, but it's not going to replace people. It's not like a factory that can go to robots. We're always going to have people. They have to have a teacher in front of a classroom. You're not going to get that much more efficient. The same thing happens in healthcare, because so much of it is human capital intensive.
That's true.
And and that's why these things are having the rate of inflation that they are compared to the other things that we go out and purchase at the store, and and computer storage, and you can buy a perfectly workable computer for $300 now that used to be able to buy a
I paid $5,000 for a computer.
Right.
I highly recommend, Jennifer, and anyone else that hasn't done it yet, is the Revenue Fixed Cost Committee that starts at the very beginning of the whole process.
That was my first meeting.
Right,
I'll do that next year.
It's really eye-opening, and as far as how our track record goes, it gives you comfort relative to the being able to forecast.
Yeah, but here's my end point. I love what's going on. you expect people in the town to know this before we go into town meeting and see everything, not you.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in general, we expect that. I have gone to meetings and never got this, so I'm taking a huge step back, not only, but on this committee, but as a resident of the town to say, probably many, many, many people don't even see the basic 101. And that's what I wanted to pull out
Yeah,
of that.
and I think that's maybe human nature, and that it's part of the whole sort of, well, but I think
Don't
it's,
complain
I'm not,
unless you get educated,
well, that,
right?
yeah, no argument on that. I think it's part of what we endeavor to do with, and you folks are doing the same thing, right, is to share as much as we can and try to bring people to the discussion, right?
Exactly.
And like you said, get educated.
Get
I think,
educated.
I think what's my experience has been that this, so let me disconnect, let's finish that discussion so it doesn't sound connected, right? My experience has been that some folks use this as a way of saying that we're heading in the wrong direction. And that's why I disconnect. Like, I'm not saying that,
Right.
but
Right.
that's
If you took it out of context.
correct. And so it's, if you look at the slides, that this ends up somewhere about, I don't know, I cut the slides down, they were too long, but I think we had only about 12 slides this year. And this is, say, number 8 or number 9. The context around this slide is that this tells us a lot about ourselves. It's our framework to make decisions. Really effective places use this to manage to success. And the ineffective places use this as saying, oh my God, it's about the amount of money we have, we need to change that equation. And ultimately, whether you have, this is your home or a private business or a public business, if you have a nickel or if you have a dollar, you still have to spend it effectively. And that's our ultimate goal, is we're trying to, I think, you're right, the revenue and fixed, it's funny when you're in this business for a while and you get a little lackadaisical, because I started on the private side. And so you think of the terms we use sometimes, and we get caught up in that. And then you think of someone, for a finance committee member or others, and sitting in that revenue and fixed cost review committee, and you're hearing about excise tax and what's happening that, or interest rate, or jet fuel excise, or whatever and you really get to see what is a moving part and what's not a moving part. And so for us, this is it sits on my desk, but this is, in total, it's my reminder about our need to constantly be vigilant about efficiency and effectiveness. That's what it does for me. Which I know you're saying the same thing, so I appreciate that. And if you can think of more ways to sort of get it out there and circulate the presentation as a whole, it's
I'm
great.
almost afraid, like you said, if you take this out of context.
Yeah, it gets-
So I'll
yeah.
just sit in my shoes and see what I would have thought 2
Yeah,
years
no,
ago.
it's true. That's why Tim saw it, I think, the first year at the president. I think you asked the first question. You said, so how are we closing that? I think it was $6 million in the fifth year then. I think it was a little high.
You had the best response, and you're out of here after year 20, something like that.
I don't want to add to the deficit. I'm trying to bring it down.
Okay, do we have anything else?
A question you didn't ask, but I'll add it. The capital stabilization fund, the recommendation will be $350,000. I want to start to add dollars to that area. It was $213, I think. Historically, we're able to pay cash for the improvements to the athletic fields that are going in this year, but I think it's a good opportunity to start to add one-time dollars to the capital stabilization. We've got a lot of projects that could go towards. We always have good capital projects in addition to the facility plan. So this year's recommendation will be $350 into that fund. So up from this historic number to, I think it's $213.
It was 250.
Yeah. So we're going to.
58, sorry.
So I'm going to recommend. I'll be recommending $350 into that.
Yeah. Oh, 58, sorry.
So that's the person you have to fear most.
Oh, I know that.
Look at the tabs.
See the tabs? How do you get so many different colors?
It's the multi-stack.
It's,
Actually, I got this at the Mass Municipal
Yeah,
Association.
it's great.
Annual meeting. They had this little thing.
they give out some good
They
freebies.
do have freebies in there with all this little stickers. Yeah. I'm done.
We're good? Did you have a question on page 208?
No.
Oh, okay, that wasn't
No,
sure.
I'm just seeing the tie-in.
Did want to say thank you, because I actually am reading the paper now here, and you go to a lot of business and economic development events, so Thank you.
It's not that big a town that I can't find my ways to.
Somebody told me to buy the paper.
The printed paper?
Look at me, I'm with the laptop. Hey, listen, I have to get it from all angles.
Okay.
It's great. Well, if I can be of any help,
Thank you.
it's been a
Thank you.
Yeah, I know the folks that have come and spoken to you, talking to them, have appreciated the opportunity to sort of talk about what they've
Yeah,
done.
great.
We were really fortunate. We got some great people.
Yep.
Yeah, we're very, very lucky. It's great. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you. Okay.
I just a real quick question. We're going to talk about next week, or next time, the special ed deficit.
Oh,
I know it's not on the agenda.
Here's my thoughts on the special ed deficit. What I thought was we got an update that is pretty much in line with the last update we got from Mr. Mealy, about 127,000 over the in-budget contingency. So what I said was when they come later in the month to talk about their budget, we can have that as a topic of discussion at that time.
Okay.
Because it seemed, I don't know if we want to talk about anything else. I just wanted to pass it along so we had an update. That's January. They should have February's. I asked him in February for an update, and so we got the update end of month January, so I'm sure he's still reconciling end of month February. And there's probably less movement as the year goes on.
Oh, sure.
So is it the circuit breaker money going into the school budget, goes into the schools? And so from that, what's the plan that when the circuit breaker money, that some of the special ed overruns get taken care of?
The circuit breaker is already included in the budget at the beginning. It's already pre-calculated, so it's already taken care of, and it's used to cover the expenses in the beginning.
So does the town have contingency plans before these dip into the sped ed stabilization fund?
The school department does. We are working that at the school department level. Then the next step is to use the stabilization fund.
So just process, I'm not sure, but just process. If there's going to be a request, and I know I was given an update this, I apologize because I got too much rolling around in my head, but if there's going to be a request to use the stabilization fund, that needs to be done as a special town meeting within a regular town meeting. So if that's going to be a request, I'll need to know that before the warrant closes.
Which is the end of the month.
No, it's earlier than that.
It's earlier than that. It's no later than the 21st will be the selectmen's last time to close that warrant of March.
Okay.
So I would expect that would, and I would really normally expect almost all of the articles to be sort of in place
Yes.
closer to the 7th.
Okay, yes.
So the question I have for the representative, I know you're not representing necessarily a total the school committee, and they're obviously representative of the town. Are the two parties working together so that we, first step is, we're not going to dip into that fund?
It's not really,
Because we didn't have any snow this year.
I'm still looking for the 1.2 million I had to cover last year.
Yeah, you got some.
It didn't come in, it came some. Yeah, go ahead. 300,000 out of 1.2 million. I have regular conversations with the superintendent about it. I'm just trying to remember what that last conversation was. And I think there's been a couple of different conversations about whether or not they would request it this year or not. I think that hasn't yet been decided, as I understood it. I'm just sort of sending the message that if it's going to be decided,
Yes, we decided.
it should be decided fairly quickly,
Right.
because it might have to take some steps to make sure we're okay.
Absolutely.
Got it. One thing I would like, if you can ask Jim to, and I understand, sort of like energy costs year to year, but sort of the components of this, and maybe if we could look back a couple of years, just so we can kind of get a sense, because the other part of this exercise is to say, are we budgeting effectively for things that we can reasonably anticipate? And, is the amount of state that we're putting away consistent with the reality of that? And so if we can kind of...
I think he pretty much has that when we did that, because I remember looking at the really spiky graph
Right.
where he talked about it. So I just think the increments, as I recall, we're talking about kind of a $4 million figure, which tends to, so $4 million of a $40 million budget tends to vary by 25%.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a swing of $1 million, and it's just because the unit, for lack of a better word, this is a terrible phrase, but the unit cost of some of the educational placements are enormous, and so the swings from year to year can be very high. He did have a year where it was a lot less, a couple of years where it was a lot more. And then I think there's also sort of the other piece, which is fairly consistent, is, on a percentage basis, we're, pretty much right in line with comparable communities. So, to me, it was, I think he's pretty much cut that, and, we're down, but, I think it's a tough, I don't know how much more accurate you can get when you're talking about a 25% variation year over year.
It really is a snow and ice problem, right?
Yeah.
So predict the winter, right? How much snow is there going to be next winter, right? Then we'll budget for that and be right or wrong. And, he has tried to do that sort of time averaging, to say here's a reasonable amount to set aside, but it's going to be the right amount. You don't know. Inflation show up, right?
Because I can't remember off the top, but basically, as I recall, the year-over-year budget went up by a healthy percentage. And then there was a $344,000 contingency within the budget, which was a newer concept, that there had been a smaller contingency in the prior year budget. So that number had increased by a good deal. I thought. Stan, am I kind of accurate?
And, Mr. Mealy's goal continues to be to set aside more and more money in different ways to be able to respond to those issues, because, it wrecks the budget. When that happens, it just wrecks the budget. So.
Okay.
So we're going to wait till that meeting.
Right, I think. Okay. Yeah. And the next item on the agenda was the report. And basically, I should have prepared a handout, but I did it this morning. So here's what I did. I looked through last year's letter, and then I basically said, what are I tried to come up with 9 topics because we have 9 members, and basically said, we'll, kind of farm it out. Each person will take a section. The first section was sort of the intro and purpose, which I said I'd like to do that.
You assigned it?
I assigned it to myself. The reserve section, Liz did all the work last year on the table, which I thought was very user-friendly.
Yeah.
So she couldn't make it tonight, but I said, could we count on you to, and I think we said that last time too, could we count on you to do that table? And then my other ones were, I'll read them all off and then we can talk about them. But process, a section on kind of how we do it. I think there was that section last year. Big picture stats, kind of a paragraph about, this is the big picture. So look for 30,000 feet. Another one we had, and I think we changed it around a little bit. I know it started as kind of, 5 increases and 5 decreases or 5 slower growth areas, and sort of an explanation thing, which I thought was useful. A CIP section, which Thomas did last year. A section on the school budget. A conclusion. And then I had question mark, we had talking about, kind of the broader picture of municipal contracts as another topic in terms,
So one paragraph, right?
yeah.
The school is only one paragraph. Am I missing something? The school last year was only one paragraph. Right here?
Yeah, it might have been, you know,
Oh,
we could
okay.
do more or less.
I'm looking for big bold print. I didn't
Yeah.
understand. This is
So
my
I
part.
think,
Okay, sorry.
so I went more or less off last year and what we did, and then, you know, I don't think we really called out the schools as much, but I keep coming, I mean, the schools are a great, big part of the budget, so I thought maybe we should just have a section on a standalone section on the school budget,
Really
kind of
should.
separate from the whole.
I think we should.
Good with that.
I'm not a good writer. I pay people
No,
that.
Susan is the writer here.
Just write it up and I'll fix it.
She'll fix it.
Yeah.
She's very good at it.
Okay.
She's the editor, she
I'll
gets
do the
a.
school
Okay.
and bring it to you. Okay. And I have no idea what to follow because you don't have anything, so I'm going to be really lenient. Is that the deal? Okay.
So I think the big thing is we don't write in the passive, that's our big thing, or all active tense.
Active tense? What does
Yeah.
that mean? Don't worry, I'll ask them.
We can send you some English.
Yeah.
You got that, right?
My dad was a
I know,
math teacher.
I have one at home, so,
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
I'll tackle the municipal contracts for you.
okay.
May I make a suggestion I mentioned to you before on the conclusion? I don't know what happened this year, but it was such a great, this is a very positive thing. Your managers, your department managers presented, they were just superb.
Yeah.
And I literally want to have a call out in our little document here, so I think that'd be part of
I
the
would agree.
conclusion.
Yeah.
You guys are really communicating well and working well together. And
What did you take on conclusion to?
I'll already get the 9. I'm already with 9.
edit. Are you the editors?
Right, we can assign Thomas.
What did he do last year?
SIP.
Maybe
He did the
we'll-
SIP, so we can give him that again.
Yeah. I do big picture stats, that's fine.
Okay.
Did we say we're going to do stabilization funds again? Because I see that.
That's the
Yeah, but
reserves.
that's Liz going to,
Yep.
Oh, okay,
Liz
okay.
Yeah.
going to do the or the
Yeah.
chart. And then,
Yeah.
Okay,
Reserve stabilization.
right.
you're doing the recommendation?
Okay, well, I hate to do the same thing, but I'll do the process again.
Okay.
I'll work on the conclusion, and that'll be like a joint thing in the end.
Oh, and
Wait a minute.
Don said he would do the enterprise funds.
Oh, so
I
So-
don't know. I'm going to ask a question. How can I do the school if I don't have it yet?
Well,
Use last year's as a format and then leave blanks for numbers and percentages?
yeah, I mean, you could take, the superintendent has released kind of her budget, and that's publicly available now.
Okay, so-
And then there's the budget, the numbers are in here, and then her budget in more detail, her budget presentations are there.
I
So,
can use that one before she shows us again. 'Cause-
right. So
okay.
I don't think it's,
Go online.
it hasn't changed much, right, from the,
No,
Oh.
no, it's a done deal, right? We submitted it.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I did, yeah, it wasn't in this big.
What did Karen do last year? Because, I don't remember.
Editor? Second editor? Editor.
She did a lot of editing, yeah.
I was just gonna-
Another cook in the kitchen.
Enterprise.
Put the 5 up and 5 down.
That's okay. I'm sure she'll have advice and
Right.
offer.
So I'll put her down for the 5 up, 5 down.
There you go,
And then, or whatever we want to call that one.
big 5.
Moving pieces, yeah.
It's like 80 show.
Cool.
There's a game plan.
And then,
When do you want
if
to
any of you
start?
have time tomorrow at 11 a.m., we could dial in to the training that
Oh, Chris,
that Chris is training tomorrow to
He
talk
said-
about Google Drive.
this is his first, this is his second one, isn't it?
There's more
He'll
training.
record it. He'll record it. He's the
Most
Chris.
of them recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's more training. I miss more training than there.
No, you get the crash course from him, direct from the source.
What I want to know
It's
is,
called custom personal.
I'm confused.
I just call.
my one question is, how can you organize Gmail in a way that's manageable once you get a string going?
So change the setting. So this is so Chris comes in and he tells everybody how he would do it. And then I go in and tell everybody not to listen to him. Because Chris manages it through conversation. And the rest of us old-timers do not manage
Right.
conversations.
Yes.
So you can change the setting so it appears like Outlook in just sequential order.
Oh, thank God.
Yes, it's in the settings side, and then I
Upper
think the
right,
tab
little-
is the mailbox tab.
little
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that
Yes.
would drive me crazy, but that could.
Oh, my God, I just
Yes.
horrifying.
Yeah. As soon as you do that, everything gets better.
Thank you.
As soon as you do that, the other thing you want to do is take the signature, and the default signature appears below the string of emails.
Yes.
So when you go to reply to something, you used to see the signature where you're typing.
Right.
But in Gmail, it moves it below the string of the conversation. Another frightening item. You can move that so it's in your reply.
Conversation.
Thank you.
I'm a survivor. I may not like it, but I'm a survivor.
Well, it felt like a cockroach, but it wasn't going well.
And here's those amazing things. Think about the range of information he's communicated tonight, from $100 million down to your Gmail servers.
Love it.
All-purpose guy.
All right.
See some synergies.
Scalable.
I love it.
Very popular these days.
Okay, so I've got that, I'll send that out, and I think I will try to set aside some time to work on we started on Google Drive last year, and we got there eventually, but there were some adventures along the way with the document, so
Oh, you
we'll.
mean like we're going to not use Dropbox to share this, work on this stuff? We're going to use Google Drive?
Yeah, I think Dropbox isn't really set up to, as a collaboration. You could use Microsoft Word within, you could pull out of Microsoft Word and put comments and stuff, but I think Google Drive is a way to go, and maybe we can do a little, a little test run on it. I'll put a couple paragraphs up there.
You might ask Chris to help you a little bit.
Yeah.
Or someone else. There's some people in the school department who've been doing that too.
Your child.
Like how do you
Yeah, exactly.
Like how to use Google Docs to collaborate. And
Right.
there's something that could be done.
Yeah. Great. All right. We have a motion?
Motion to adjourn the meeting? Adjourn the meeting?
Second and
So join.
All in favor?
aye.